Good afternoon and welcome to this launch of the annual report of St. Francis Hospice for 2020. It's the first time we've had a formal launch of the annual report, but it's appropriate that we should, because we're recording the activities and achievements of a most extraordinary year, extraordinary for the whole country, for the world indeed, but very challenging in particular for St. Francis Hospice, for our services, our staff, our patients and their families. And our annual report seeks to capture both the scale of the changes which were undertaken and the success with which that was achieved by the whole team. We hope in this short webinar to give you the main insights of what was achieved by St. Francis Hospice in that year, why palliative care is such an important aspect of our healthcare system, to give you an idea of the innovation and the interdisciplinary working which is part of the service provided to patients and their families, and hopefully to enthuse you as supporters and stakeholders to continue to be supporters of St. Francis Hospice. We are very fortunate to have such a strong positive relationship with HSE, especially locally, but we depend ultimately on the support of the community we serve, and we work very hard to ensure that we maintain and deepen those links. And through the annual report and the outreach activities of our team, we hope to build on those relationships into the future. So over the next half an hour or so, you'll hear from our CEO, Fintan Fagan, and you'll hear from some of the team who are involved in precisely the type of innovative cross-disciplinary care which makes such a difference to our patients and their families. So by the end of the session, hopefully you will have learned more about an extraordinary year, an extraordinary team, and you'll be deepened in your conviction that St. Francis Hospice is indeed worthy of support from our community. So without further ado, I hand you over to Fintan, who'll talk about the highlights of the year in St. Francis Hospice.
Thank you very much, Dermot. I'm very proud to present some of the highlights of the hospice this year. And St. Francis Hospice is all about the individual. All our volunteers and our staff and our contract staff are focused on the individual and focused on families. And this was no greater evidence of that than in 2020. COVID-19 was a huge challenge for us, and our independence as a voluntary organisation has always allowed us to respond to community needs and harness community support. But we couldn't do it without the close partnership that we have with the HSE locally, particularly in Swords and in Ballymun. This slide here will take you through some of the challenges that we faced in COVID and how we responded to those. So working from the left-hand side clockwise, looking at this slide, first of all, when COVID-19 came to our doors, we risk assessed and we looked at how we would implement a contact tracing system. We implemented a very detailed surveillance of all our patients to try and protect them from COVID-19. We implemented extensive social distancing across both our hospices and helped train our community palliative care staff on how to implement social distancing while they attended patients in their homes. Staff training was a large part of what we did, particularly focusing on information around patient care and the use of PPE and that importance of maintaining contact with our patients despite the barrier of PPE being there. We implemented new visiting arrangements. Visiting is really important to palliative care. It's really important to us in St. Francis Hospice. So we maintained visiting throughout the pandemic with some restrictions, but obviously we adapted to situations and were very empathetic to patients and families and facilitated as much visiting as possible. We enhanced our environment with additional cleaning systems, already at a very high standard, but we took it to a new level during COVID-19. We implemented new key equipment, including PPE, and we implemented perspex screens. That was difficult for us. Our philosophy is to have close contact and be a welcoming environment. So putting the perspex screens up between our reception staff and our security staff and visitors was a challenge, but we've managed to maintain that close contact despite having to do that. We facilitated remote working where possible. Our emphasis was to continue to be with patients and families. So obviously our clinical staff stayed in close contact and stayed at work, but our support staff made sure that they were here as well to support the clinical staff. The impact in the community is measured by statistics, but we always have the individual patient and the family in mind, and we always want to ensure that we maintain that. But we are very proud that in 2020, we treated practically the same number of patients that we did in previous years. So we treated 1,779 patients, of which 1,459 of those were treated in the community, in patients' homes, be they nursing homes or other institutions. In that community, our nursing staff made 11,000 visits to people in the community, and we put in particular support for nursing homes who were dealing with death and dying and bereavement in much more than they might have in previous years. We serve a catchment area population of 700,000, and of those people who died in our area, 1 in 3 were looked after by us, by our care. So there remains to be unmet need, and that's why we want to increase that 1 in 3 number over the coming years. You may have heard in the media that bereavement was particularly challenging in COVID-19, and St. Francis Hospice wanted to respond to that. So some of you may recall our service of remembrances, which would have been held in local churches. We converted those remembrances to videos. So we had 8 service of remembrances throughout 2020. In addition, we would always have bereavement information evenings in our hospices to give people an understanding of bereavement and grief and what it means and how each individual might handle it. So we had 4 videos which were specifically dedicated to our bereavement information evening. Our social workers delivered 1,200 bereavement counselling and support services, and they were supported by our volunteer bereavement support sessions. And it's a very innovative initiative where our volunteers are trained by our social workers to provide one-to-one bereavement support sessions, and we had 435 of those during 2020. Our services are provided free of charge, and it's important to us that our services are accessed and that they're of high quality. Our annual report does in great detail reflect the quality of the service that we have provided. But in terms of access, on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see the donut that shows that 74% of our patients had a cancer diagnosis and 26% had a non-cancer diagnosis. And they are diseases such as respiratory disease, heart failure, and motor neuron disease. Since we opened our new hospice in Blanchardstown in 2014, we've been able to increase the number of patients with a non-cancer diagnosis that have been treated. And we want to ensure that we continue to build those services and that hospice perhaps moves away from the traditional view of hospice where it was only cancer patients who were looked after. Place of death is really important, and I mentioned that our community palliative care nurses responded to the needs in the community, and the demand and the desire for people to die at home increased. 52% of our patients in 2020 died at home, 36% died in our inpatient unit, and 12% died in hospital. And for us, those figures of 52 and 36 are really important because we believe that either at home or in our hospice inpatient units are the best places where we can provide our service. And that's perhaps the one time in your life where all your needs are looked after. And our doctors work in the hospitals as well, so we were able to provide the support into the hospitals as well. We'd now like to share with you a patient story.
My name is Aisling and I'm 47. I'm a mother of 1, and this is my husband Peter.
Older.
In 2019, I went into hospital with back pain and was diagnosed then with stage 4 breast cancer, which had progressed to my spine. So I now have bone cancer as well as breast cancer.
We felt lost in the beginning.
We were devastated.
Yeah.
We were completely devastated. Our world was upside down. I had just got my dream job. I was actually going for a fitting for the uniform for it. And I came out and I said, I'll just go into hospital and I'll just find out what this pain is in my back. I'll just get it sorted before I start this job once and for all. And that was it. That was the last time I got to try on that uniform. We had so many plans that year. We had said that 2019 was going to be our year.
And as I say, between that feeling of helplessness, going from, I suppose, feeling that we were fully in control of our lives.
We sat down, we discussed everything. Until we knew what we were dealing with, we didn't discuss it with Emma Louise, our daughter. But as soon as we knew it was serious, we took her aside and had a conversation with her. She took it quite well, considering she was only 14 at the time. We constantly talked to each other, communicated with each other.
We took a little bit of time initially, because obviously there was upset there, and then we kind of had to gather ourselves and say, right, where do we go from here? How do we manage this? And we kind of started our own road to kind of planning and how we were going to deal with this and how we were going to live with it. And then all of a sudden there was a helping hand there. Things became, it gave us a lot clearer. There was a lot more clarity in terms of how to approach things.
We get great help from the hospital and from St. Francis. When they came out and they explained what they did, and the more time went on and the more phone calls we had, I was able to go over to St. Francis and see what it was all about there, and I was able to get therapy over there as well. When then COVID hit, they kept in contact by phone and by Zoom call and did the peer group course for me as well, which was a great help.
The PEER programme, which stands for Palliative Enablement, Exercise and Rehabilitation, is a joint initiative that was set up between Occupational Therapy and Physiotherapy in St. Francis Hospice Dublin to provide palliative rehabilitation to patients in their home. It is a goal-based programme and consists of exercise, which is completed by the physiotherapist, and education, which is completed by the occupational therapist.
It focuses very much on self-management, and the idea is that we give people the tools to know how they can move their bodies, how to exercise. For a lot of patients, they might be a little bit nervous about moving or exercising because they're afraid that they're going to make their illness worse or they're going to hurt themselves. So our job is very much about identifying the appropriate exercise for the people that we have in front of us.
As Aisling has benefited from is that peer support from other patients online. The encouragement to re-engage in activities, and also benefiting from connecting with patients who are also on a similar journey to them.
It was nice as well to do with other people in a similar situation. Everyone took it not too seriously, but serious enough as well. Everyone turned up every week, but we all did it with a light heart because it was a nice part of the week that I looked forward to on a Monday morning and on a Wednesday. You never feel a burden. You're the priority for them, no matter what you're going through. Even if you're having a great day, they still take the time to ask you about every aspect of what wasn't great last week for you, to make sure that you're okay and you're over that, or, do you need help with that still, or can I do anything for you?
It's an incredibly effective form of assistance from both their voice point of view to the actual their physical support as well. It's a valuable support that nobody should be overwhelmed by in any way, shape or form.
And everybody should take up on it. If they're given the opportunity, everyone should take the opportunity with both hands, because it really will make your life so much easier.
Hello everybody, my name is Lisa McGurr and I'm the Physiotherapy Manager here in St. Francis Hospice Dublin.
And my name is Niamh Donnelly and I'm the Occupational Therapy Manager. Today we're going to give you an overview of the rehabilitative palliative care services provided by St. Francis Hospice Dublin.
People are always intrigued when I tell them that I'm a physiotherapist in a hospice. They're usually shocked when I show them a picture of our gym with our exercise bikes and our weights and our equipment. But I always explain that a life-limiting condition does not imply a loss of potential for functional improvement, and even a small change in function can have an enormous impact on a person's quality of life. Studies have shown that palliative care patients consider mobility issues to be the most important. And my experience over the years with our patients here in St. Francis Hospice is that they're very invested in physiotherapy and any functional gains that they can achieve.
Occupational therapy, or OT, is, I suppose, a less well-known profession. It's a profession focused on helping people to do the everyday things that they want to do and that they need to do. In palliative care, OT interventions are focused on re-engagement in meaningful activities and promoting independence, supporting patients to overcome barriers to completing activities that matter to them. Interventions are varied, for example, providing a comfortable seat on the inpatient unit to enable a person to engage and interact with family and friends, to providing education and grading activities to support a person to return to loved hobbies. Some examples would include baking, art, and golf. We've even supported one lady to return to dragon boat racing. Together with physiotherapy, we provide rehabilitative palliative care to enable people to live life to their fullest. People look for ways to see themselves in a positive light as capable, resourceful, interesting, competent individuals. This doesn't change with disability or illness, but the ability to engage in activities that promotes this positive view of self is often challenged. Palliative rehabilitation integrates rehabilitation, enablement, empowerment, and self-management into the holistic model of palliative care. It aims to optimize a person's function and well-being, enable them to live as independently and as fully as possible, with choice and autonomy within the limitations of advancing illness. The goals set in palliative rehabilitation can vary along a continuum from focusing on improving independence and function to adapting to loss and optimizing comfort. The process of palliative rehabilitation aims to promote a positive view of self.
Palliative rehabilitation is largely delivered by physiotherapists and occupational therapists working in partnership with other members of the multidisciplinary team. In the inpatient unit, patients are seen for rehabilitation, symptom management, and discharge planning. And in 2020, there were more than 4,000 interventions provided by physiotherapy and occupational therapy to our inpatients. Both teams also see community-based patients on an individual basis, both at home, via telehealth, and in our outpatient department of the hospice, with 6,000 interventions delivered in 2020. Myself and Niamh feel that this is quite remarkable. Our small teams of just 4.1 whole-time equivalent physiotherapists and 3.6 whole-time equivalent occupational therapists delivered 10,000 interventions to patients last year, despite the limitations posed by the COVID pandemic. We also have seamless communication with our colleagues in the acute hospitals to ensure optimal patient care when patients are transferred between our services. So in addition to our individual services with patients, Physio and OT also have a number of group programs. Physiotherapy run a pulmonary rehab program for patients with advanced and severe breathlessness called Exhale, and Occupational Therapy run a program called Empower for stress and anxiety management. We're also the only hospice with the Sláinte Care Integration Fund project, introducing specialist palliative care rehabilitation to patients in their own homes for the very first time. And as you'll have seen from our patient Ashling's video, the PEER program is a collaborative initiative between physiotherapy and occupational therapy. This program aims to increase independence and self-management for palliative care patients in the community through exercise and education. Patients who are referred to the hospice service can avail of this dynamic program, improve their confidence, independence, and function, and ultimately be discharged from the service just like Aisling was. And this overturns the traditional view of hospice care as being only for the dying.
Physiotherapy and occupational therapy were early adopters of telehealth platforms for delivery of both individual and group rehabilitation at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are the only hospice to deliver palliative rehabilitation via telehealth throughout the pandemic. The PEER program was successfully transitioned to a virtual platform, and patient feedback and outcomes remain very positive. And we're hoping to recommence the in-person groups very soon. By 2046, it's projected there's going to be an 89% increase in the number of older people living with palliative care need in Ireland. Rehabilitative palliative care supports the person to maintain or improve their function and allowing them to live as independently and as fully as possible, reducing their dependence on others. This includes dependence on family and friends, home health, and inpatient admissions. Rehabilitative palliative care can commence at any stage along the trajectory of the illness and continues until the terminal phase. The earlier it is commenced, the more valuable it is for the person to ensure that they can live as independently as possible and as fully as possible for as long as possible.
In St. Francis Hospice, we believe strongly that palliative rehabilitation is the transformation of the dying into the living. We want to add value to our patients' lives and enable them to live as fully as possible for as long as possible. And put quite simply, palliative rehabilitation is the transformation and restoration of the patient to a person. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa and Niamh, for that fascinating insight into the work that's being done in the area of rehabilitation and palliative care. I hope that this session has given all of those attending a sense not only of the extraordinary response to the extraordinary challenges that 2020 brought for St. Francis Hospice, but of the significance of the services which are delivered, not only in terms of volume and scale, but in terms of quality and the professionalism and expertise brought to bear by the team whose commitment is evident from what we've heard and from the terms of the annual report. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the hospice team in Raheny and Blanchardstown, our staff, our volunteers, and the big network of community supporters for their commitment, exemplified by the way in which people responded to the unique challenges of 2020. I'd like to thank Fintan and Lisa and Niamh for their participation this afternoon, and thank all of you for attending this session and for hearing more about the work of St. Francis Hospice. We believe palliative care has a vital role to play. The demand and need for it is expanding, and so is the need for the supporters who were so generous through 2020, continue to be so supportive, and will be so vital as we plan the development of our services for the future. So thank you all for your participation.